Every culture in human history has been obsessed with one thing: not dying. We've tried drinking mercury, bathing in youth fountains, and right now, billionaires are injecting themselves with young blood and eating 40 supplements a day just to live to 120. Spoiler alert, it's not really working, because humans, like almost every living thing on Earth, are bound by a biological law. You grow, you age, your cells give up, and you die. Except that law is a complete lie. Immortality does actually exist. It is biologically real. But evolution didn't give it to us. It gave it to a tiny blob of jelly, a pinchy bottom feeder, and a microscopic sea monster. Today, we're breaking down the science of biological immortality. We're going to look at how animals cheat death, why our cells can't cheat death, and why turning on the immortality gene would probably just give us super cancer. And obviously, we're going to talk about whether humans could ever actually live forever. Let's start right away with the champion of cheating death, the immortal jellyfish. Now, normally, a jellyfish's life cycle works like a one-way highway. A free-swimming larvae settles onto the ocean floor and turns into a polyp. Think of a polyp like a little plant-like stem. That polyp buds off into an adult jellyfish called a medusae. The adult floats around, reproduces, ages, and dies. Standard stuff. But the immortal jellyfish decided it wants to be special. If this jellyfish gets sick, starves, or becomes physically injured, or it simply gets too old, it doesn't die. Instead, it absorbs its own tentacles, collapses into a blob of unspecialized cells called a cyst, sinks to the ocean floor, and rewinds its entire body back to a juvenile polyp. To put that in perspective for humans, imagine you're 80 years old, you get a bad flu, and instead of dying, your body shrinks, turns into a fetus, hatches into a baby, and you restart your life with a completely brand new DNA repair mechanism. It's literally like a butterfly turning back into a caterpillar. So, what exactly is happening in this reversal process? Well, firstly, the process itself is called transdifferentiation. Big name, I know. In human bodies, once a cell becomes specialized, say a muscle cell or a skin cell, it's locked into that job forever. So a skin cell can't suddenly decide it wants to be a brain cell. But during transdifferentiation, these immortal jellyfish can take an already adult, specialized cell, wipe its programming, and transform it into an entirely different cell type. Muscle cells can become nerve cells or stem cells. Genetic sequencing shows that during this reset stage, the jellyfish ramp up genes responsible for DNA repair, telomerase activity, and stem cell maintenance, while completely suppressing cellular aging and cell death pathways. By doing all that, these jellyfish can just reset their biological age indefinitely. Now, can this jellyfish die? Yes, it can still be eaten by a turtle and die. These guys are the size of a fingernail, so they're not invulnerable. But purely from a biological aging standpoint, they can repeat this loop of transdifferentiation indefinitely. Okay, but what if you don't want to revert to a baby every time life gets tough? What if you just want to grow older without actually aging? This is the route that lobsters took. Lobsters exhibit what biologists call negligible senescence. Senescence is just a fancy scientific word for biological decay with age. A 100-year-old lobster doesn't get weak, doesn't lose muscle mass, and doesn't experience a drop in fertility. In fact, older, bigger lobsters are actually more fertile and stronger than younger ones. To understand how lobsters do this and why we can't, let's talk about the shoelace problem. If you look at a typical shoelace, it has that little plastic tip on the end to keep the shoelace from fraying. Similar to that analogy, for us humans, DNA is packed into chromosomes. Every time your cells divide to make new cells, the machinery that copies your DNA can't quite reach the very end of the DNA strand. So, to protect your vital genetic instructions from getting chopped off, chromosomes are capped with protective repeating segments of DNA called telomeres. Telomeres are your cellular plastic shoelace tip. Every time your cell divides, the telomere gets a bit shorter. Eventually, after about 50 to 60 divisions, the telomeres are completely worn down. The cell panics, stops dividing, and either dies or turns into a zombie cell that spews toxic inflammation into surrounding tissue. This is basically human aging in a nutshell. So, how do lobsters bypass this? They essentially produce an unlimited supply of an enzyme called telomerase. Telomerase is basically an infinite supply of fresh plastic shoelace tips. It constantly rebuilds the ends of the lobster's chromosomes across almost all of its body tissues. Because their telomeres never shorten, lobster cells never hit replicative exhaustion. You might be thinking, if this is true, why aren't there 500-year-old lobsters the size of minivans? This is due to the armor trap. Lobsters never stop growing, which means they have to continuously shed their hard exoskeletons in a process called molting. Molting takes an absurd amount of energy. As the lobster gets bigger and bigger, molting requires exponentially more energy. Eventually, the lobster gets so large that it literally runs out of metabolic energy mid molt, gets stuck in its old shell, and dies of physical exhaustion. So, lobsters do die, but they don't die of old age. They die because shedding their armor is a full body workout that gets harder the bigger they get. If you think the jellyfish and lobster cycles of immortality are cool, let me introduce you to the coolest one, Hydra. Hydra are tiny freshwater invertebrates that look like little tree branches with tentacles. In laboratory settings, scientists have tracked Hydra populations for decades without noticing a single sign of aging or an increase in mortality rates. Why? Because a Hydra's body is almost made entirely of active, endlessly self renewing stem cells. Every 20 days, a Hydra replaces every single cell in its entire body. Researchers isolated Hydra's stem cell to find out what gene was driving this infinite renewal, and they found one major player, a transcription factor called the FOXO gene. When researchers knocked out or inactivated the FOXO gene in Hydra, the animals suddenly started aging. Their stem cells disappeared and their immune systems collapsed. And here's the kicker. Humans have the FOXO gene too. In fact, studies analyzing humans who lived past 100 years old consistently showed that they often possess particularly active variants of the FOXO3 gene. With all this information, you're probably asking, if lobsters have telomerase, jellyfish have transdifferentiation, and Hydra have FOXO, why can't we take some pill to activate these three things and live forever? Well, this comes down to an evolutionary trade-off in biology. Humans are massively complex, warm-blooded mammals made of around 37 trillion cells working in tight synchronization. To keep 37 trillion cells operating without chaos, evolution had to impose strict limits on cell division. Do you know what happens when a human cell shortens past its telomeres, expresses unlimited telomerase, refuses to die, and divides uncontrollably? That's called cancer. Roughly 90% of human cancer cells achieve their immortality by turning on the exact same enzyme that lobsters use to stay alive, telomerase. If we flooded human bodies with unrestrained telomerase or turned our adult cells back into stem-like states via transdifferentiation, we wouldn't turn into ageless superhumans. We would turn into walking masses of tumors. Telomere shortening in humans isn't a design flaw. It's an anti-cancer survival mechanism. Evolution traded individual cell immortality for overall organism survival. Cancer is ultimately a numbers game. Every single cell division carries a micro risk of a copying error that leads to a mutation. A human body is made of 37 trillion cells constantly dividing, and a lobster is drastically smaller, with far fewer total cells and a much lower rate of total daily divisions. Apart from numbers, telomerase just isn't as cancer causing in other organisms like lobsters as it is for humans. This is partly because telomerase is just much more regulated in lobsters. Think of them like a construction crew. In human cancer cells, this crew can go rogue and build anywhere. In lobsters, the crew only builds when they're told, following very strict orders. The other part of this equation is temperature. Lobsters live at the bottom of cold oceans, so their metabolism runs extremely slowly in comparison to ours. Lobsters run so cold and slow that their DNA suffers far fewer random mutations. Does this mean that human longevity research is hopeless? Absolutely not. Understanding how these immortal animals operate has completely changed modern medicine. Instead of trying to make humans immortal, scientists are learning how to use these biological tricks to extend our health span, which is the number of years we live healthy, disease-free lives. First up is stem cell reprogramming and transdifferentiation. This is obviously inspired by the immortal jellyfish. Scientists have developed iPSCs, or induced pluripotent stem cells. We can now take a human skin cell, reprogram it back to an embryonic stem cell state, and turn it back into a fresh heart muscle cell or brain neuron to repair damaged organs. Researchers are also creating targeted drugs to hunt down and flush out those zombie senescent cells whose telomeres have run out, reducing systemic inflammation and revitalizing aging tissue. That may sound confusing, but I talk a ton about zombie cells and how they work in my video about cancer research, if you're interested. Lastly, we are using targeted gene therapy. By studying the FOXO pathway in Hydra, longevity researchers are investigating how to boost our body's natural antioxidant defenses and stem cell preservation without triggering tumor growth. Immortality is not science fiction, and it isn't magic. It's a series of highly specific biological hacks: cellular undo buttons, chromosome repairs, and stem cell maintenance. Well, you probably won't be rewinding your body back into a baby anytime soon. The secrets hidden inside jellyfish, lobsters, and Hydra are laying the groundwork for a future where growing old doesn't have to mean growing frail. Thank you so much for watching.